The amount of heat trapped by the Earth has reached record levels. According to a UN report published this Monday, the last 11 years have been the warmest ever recorded. For the first time, the World Meteorological Organization warned of a growing energy imbalance driven by rising greenhouse gas emissions. Scientists also fear that a natural warming phase called El Niño could soon bring further heat records. Well, for more on this, our Environment Editor Valerie Dekimpe joins me on set. Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Karis.
The UN releases their State of the Climate report every year. This year, they've decided to include the notion of energy imbalance. What does that mean?
It's the rate at which energy enters and leaves the planet. And I want to show you a graphic published by the WMO. And you see essentially that under a stable climate, there is energy coming from the sun. And so you have the same amount of energy coming in as the same amount of energy leaving the planet. What's happening now is that under an unstable climate, the Earth is gaining much more heat than it actually can release. And so it's a bit like a pressure cooker. You have all this heat building up. Why? Greenhouse gas emissions, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, resulting from human activities are all really good at trapping heat. And so we know that they have reached their highest levels since about 2 million years. And so as emissions continue to rise, there's more excess heat building up with a so-called energy imbalance, in the words of scientists from the WMO. And this notion of energy imbalance has now reached a new high in 2025, according to this report.
Okay, so what happens with all of this excess heat?
Well, part of that excess heat is, trapped in those gases, warms the atmosphere and the land about 1% and 5% respectively. It also leads to melting of ice sheets across the world, both the north and south poles. But a whopping 90% of all the excess heat is actually taken up by the world's oceans. According to the WMO, ocean warming has more than doubled over the last 20 years. And ocean warming has far-reaching consequences. It does harm marine life. Oceans become more acidic as well because they trap so much heat. It also fuels tropical storms, contributes to rising sea levels, and so a list of cascading effects. And so this energy imbalance essentially drives climate change and a rise in global temperatures. You said it, you mentioned it. The report also confirms that the last 11 years have been the warmest on record. In 2025, average air temperatures were about 1.43 degrees Celsius above those of pre-industrial times, so before we began burning fossil fuels. Now, this report comes in the midst of war in the Middle East, and to many people, the war has come to further expose the need to rapidly move away from fossil fuels. Here's a reaction to the report from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Let's take a listen.
In the edge of war, climate stress is also exposing another truth. Our addiction to fossil fuels is destabilizing both the climate and global security. Now more than ever, we must accelerate the just transition to renewable energy. Renewables deliver climate security, energy security, and national security.
Well, the UN has also warned that global weather was still under the influence of La Niña. So how could that affect weather patterns?
Well, La Niña is a naturally occurring climate phenomenon that cools the surface of the ocean, of the Pacific Ocean. Its alter ego is El Niño, so it's a warming phenomenon. We are currently under the influence of La Niña and its temporary cooling effect. And so that meant that 2025 was not as warm as 2024. Essentially, it could have been worse. But the WMO is predicting a possible development of El Niño, before the end of the year. So we are likely to see even higher temperatures in 2027. Important to note, however, that regardless of these climate phenomena, whether it's La Niña or El Niño, scientists do see that temperatures are rising consistently with their models and long-term predictions, and that is a result of human-induced climate change.
All right, Valerie Dekimpe, thank you very much for
Thanks,
helping
Karis.
break that down.